Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 268.
And this week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, what I did have was going to follow on from my last episode about feet, which will give you a clue about what I'm going to be talking about when I come back next. But I stumbled across something else, and that's what I'm going to share because it follows on beautifully from your last two episodes. Now, as is my usual tendency, I'm going to give you the long-winded way of how I got to this, but it is en route of some fiction recommendations, so bear with me. Now, I don't know if you get this email, but I get the Audible Daily Deal offer from Audible, obviously. And they quite often get me with it. And I don't know if I just happen to like the popular types of novels. Well, it's not just novels, actually. I bought some non-fiction, which is another one that is scheduled for sometime in the future for one of these episodes. So maybe I'm just sort of tapped into the popular thing because it's not tailored enough that I think it's personal. So I think it probably is just a general thing, but they quite often interest me. And this one, I like the look of the cover. It was a woman with a dog, and the title was How to Age Disgracefully. How could I resist? How could I resist? This was a new author to me. Her name is Clare Pooley. And so I got it. I think it was $1.99 or something. So I got it and I loved it. Really, really good book. And so good that I went on to read her other two fictional novels called The Authenticity Project and The People on Platform 5. And if you're listening to this and you want to go and listen to them, you can listen to How to Age Disgracefully first, but I would listen to The Authenticity Project before you listen to The People on Platform 5. One doesn't exactly follow on from the other, but the Platform 5 one kind of refers back to The Authenticity Project. So you wouldn't majorly spoil it, but you'd spoil it a little bit. And then the last book that she has on offer is called The Sober Diaries. And this is more of an autobiographical book. It's a combination. Well, I tell you what, I'll read you what Audible has to say about it. It's called The Sober Diaries, How One Woman Stopped Drinking and Started Living. Like many women, Clare Pooley found the juggle of a stressful career and family life a struggle. So she left her successful role as a managing partner in one of the world's biggest advertising agencies to look after her family. She knew the change wouldn't be easy, but she never expected to find herself an overweight, depressed, middle-aged mother of three who was drinking more than a bottle of wine a day and spending her evenings Googling, "Am I an alcoholic?" This book is the bravely honest story of a year in Clare's life, a year that started with her quitting booze and then being given the devastating diagnosis of breast cancer. By the end of the year, she is booze-free and cancer-free. So it does have a happy ending. No longer has a wine belly and is 2 stone lighter and with a life that is so much richer, healthier and more rewarding than ever before. She has a happier family and a more positive outlook. And so I thought, well, this sounds interesting. And I've really enjoyed her fictional writing, so I'm going to give this a listen. And it's really good. It is basically what it says on the tin, as Audible described. But she, following on from a birthday party, she woke up the next day and she was feeling rubbish. And she'd been, thinking for a while that she knew this was a problem. Like she said, she'd been Googling, "Am I an alcoholic?" And it just sort of came to a head. And she thought, hey, I'm going to give this up. I'm really going to do it this time. She tried before, and this time she was going to do it. And I suspect she might even have the Gretchen Rubin combination that I do. Definitely a rebel tendency and definitely a questioner in there too. But although she was quite interested in maybe going to AA meetings, they just didn't really fit for her. One, she actually didn't want people to know. So she didn't really want to go to local meetings and run the risk of being seen. And through her Googling, she'd come across blogs. And so she decided, she'd always been interested in writing, she decided she was going to write a blog. And so that's what she started doing. And she started writing in her blog every day, just really for herself. And the blog was called Mummy Was a Secret Drinker. And you can find that on her website, clarepooley.com. That's one of the things there's a link to. And this book, I think, really is, well, not I think, it is turning that blog over the period of a year, turning it into a book to help other people. What's interesting, actually, is that she takes on board a lot of the philosophies and the steps from AA in her journey, and she adopts a lot of the things. And a friend of hers actually says to her, you have actually gone through the AA steps, but she just sort of resisted. She didn't really want to do it that way, so she formed her own way of doing it. The one thing she said that she did feel that she'd missed out on, that later on she realized through the battling cancer journey, was that she missed that person-to-person contact that she would have gotten from AA, that she got through the cancer experience. And she talks about later on, when she gets the cancer diagnosis and the treatment that she goes through, she really likens it to the journey that she'd gone through with giving up alcohol, and that it actually turned out it stood her in really good stead to deal with the breast cancer. It's a fabulous mix of her always researching. She says whenever she does anything like this, she just researches all the time. So I thought, she's my kind of woman. So in her blog, she shares a combination of things she's researched with what's going on with her during this process, or how she's feeling and the experiences she's having. And then, sharing some of the things, some of her wisdom, some of the things that, the analogies and things that she comes up with to help other people. So I would say for anyone who is thinking, and it's one of those things, like we've said before, with dealing with addictions, it's useful in transferring to others, but it is very specifically alcohol, and very helpful for anyone who is thinking of trying to give up alcohol, because it really does take you through all those stages over the year. And I think if you were thinking of embarking on the same journey she has, I think you would find it really, really helpful. There was loads of interesting information that she shared throughout, but there was some specific stuff for women that I found interesting that I did make some notes of. But she was saying in general, when it comes to alcohol, she's saying she also used to be a smoker. And she said, government health warnings for smoking, very in your face. They weren't always, but for a long time now they have been. When you're smoking yourself, you don't, or you go into denial about thinking that it applies to you. But she was describing how that was definitely the case for her. But once you get over the addiction, you can really see clearly how bad it was for you. And you want to, grab hold of people who are smoking and shaking them and trying to get them to see sense. But society is good at ignoring, largely, the detrimental effects of alcohol. You can consume it out in the open, legally, be boastful about it even. So, it must be pretty harmless, right, if the government kind of backs it. And she was saying that, there are government guidelines there, but to be ignored when you feel that they're inconvenient. And she says you get very good at ignoring articles about things like liver damage, and very good at jumping on articles that maybe laud the benefits of red wine, for example. And then she cites a study published in The Lancet by Professor Nutt in 2010, which was about the effect of 20 drugs, the effect of the drugs to the user, but also to society as a whole. By far the most harmful drug of them all, considering this combined effect, is alcohol. But we don't even see it as a drug. But even just to the individual, it's still one of the most harmful. She said that it's more dangerous than any of the drugs tested apart from heroin, crack cocaine and methamphetamine. But it's more deadly than tobacco, cannabis, cocaine, ecstasy, ketamine. If alcohol came on the market now, it would never be legalized. But it's acceptable, it's accepted, it's almost weird if you don't drink it, thought of that way by a lot of people. It's also extremely addictive. She talks a lot in the book about dopamine, and she goes into, again, with this combination of how she finds the effects on herself, but doing some research. So she talks a lot about addiction and dopamine. Very interesting. This nut report concluded it was more addictive than any drug bar heroin, cocaine, nicotine and barbiturates. 1.6 million people in the UK are dependent on alcohol, and that's 10% of all drinkers. The impact on physical and mental health is really significant. Cirrhosis of the liver, for example. And she talks about how liver disease is becoming more and more common. And there are, in particular, when talking to liver surgeons, huge increases. There are, over recent years, huge increases in women in their 30s and 40s. And these are often women in higher end executive jobs. It just becomes an intrinsic part of their lifestyle. But women apparently cope with alcohol far worse than men. We often tend to drink stronger drinks. She was saying that, where she'd be drinking wine, men, and this is not the case all the time, but men are often drinking men are often drinking beer. She'd be drinking wine, which tends to be stronger, but quite often, matching drink for drink. We're generally speaking a lower weight than men. We also have a lower level of the key metabolizing enzyme that helps break down alcohol. And then to cap it all, estrogen intensifies the effect of alcohol. Women become dependent on alcohol faster than men, and it's twice as deadly for women than it is for men. On average, women addicted to alcohol will die 20 years earlier than those not addicted to alcohol. Oh, crikey, that was scary. 4 or more drinks a day increases the risk of heart disease by 4, and you're 5 times more likely to have a stroke. This is for women. Cancer risk, especially breast cancer, you have a 15% higher risk of breast cancer, 15% higher than teetotalers if you have just 3 drinks a week. And then mental health strongly linked to depression, cognitive decline, impaired memory, increased anxiety, emotional issues. And interestingly, it's often undiagnosed or confused with dementia and or aging. So some interesting bits of information there that I certainly wasn't aware of. She talks, like I say, she talks about addiction and dopamine. She talks about some crossover to other addictions. And she was saying that she expected to lose weight when she stopped the alcohol. She'd done what quite a few of us have probably done, worked out how many calories were in a bottle of wine and et cetera, et cetera. And also the decrease in sort of resistance to not having certain things. You quite often get into eating problematic things or overeating problematic things when you've had a drink. And she was dismayed to find that she hadn't lost any weight. In fact, she'd gained some. But then when she really thought about it, her main distraction technique was eating slices of cake that were bigger than her head, she described it, and making really delicious, rich, hot chocolate. So, she had a bit of a chat with herself and said, hey, okay, this is a phase, I'm aware of it, but it's working quite well to get me from that place to this place, but I know I need to tackle it. And she did gradually transition into trying some other things. She had a very funny bit where, again, she'd been researching. So I think she would put in various symptoms or whatever, and then different things would come up, and then she'd go down the various rabbit holes. And she tried a mindfulness guided meditation type thing because she'd read that, mindfulness was good and meditating was good. And she described how she was when she was doing it and how, the voice is saying, thoughts come in, just let them come, let them go. And she just described how she got more and more anxious and more thoughts were coming in and more, no, this is not for me. This is not for me. It's not working. But then when she researched a bit more about what it gave you, she came across the idea of flow and how getting into a flow state was the same kind of thing, and how you could get yourself into the state that a sort of mindfulness meditation is trying to get you into by doing something that gets you into that flow state. And that was something that she found, that was something that she realized that her writing did for her. So she was like, oh, actually, I'm doing that already. I'm just doing it in a different way. So she was very good at researching things that would help, trying them, finding that maybe they didn't work for her, but then thinking of something else that would. So again, this is, I think, from her approach and the way she talks about things, is a great book to read for anyone trying this, because it just goes to show that there are multiple ways of tackling things. There are all sorts of things. I'm just looking at the clock and seeing how long I've already been rambling on about. But she talks about the wine witch, which is basically that, that little voice in your ear that you talk about all the time with, the lower brain and the animal brain talking to you and saying, oh, just do this and just do that. And she talks about how she kills off the wine witch, but it comes back, and how to tackle that. She talks a lot about, which made me think about the follow-on from your dopamine reset week last week. She talks about dopamine and about the base levels and how it messes around with that and how you can work on resetting it. And it's really interesting following along, watching or listening to the changes that happen. And as the alcohol addiction goes down and flares up at various times, and she has to find different ways of coping. And she talks about a really good, and again, this is something you talk about with anything you're trying to give up, is that, she got lots of emails and lots of people getting in touch with her, talking to her about their struggles as she was talking on her blog, and lots of people who were falling at one of the first hurdles. And so she comes up with this analogy about moving from one field to another, and there were all these hurdles in the way. So you have all these people telling you about this amazing field that you can get to, but that there are going to be a lot of hurdles on the way, but they're worth it. And once you get there, it's amazing, and you'll be really glad that you made the effort. But the field that you're in, it's really rubbish. It's kind of safe in its way because you know it already. And, you get swayed by these people talking about this amazing other field. And so you try and you get over these hurdles. And she describes all these horrible sounding hurdles and sometimes, you fall at the first one. And then you go back again and you get over that hurdle, and it's the next one that you fall at. And, you just keep falling at those initial hurdles, and you never get to the good place. And every time you try that, it's reinforcing that maybe it's just better to stay where because it's just too hard. And she just keeps pushing, and she always finds a why I need to not give in at this point. And she very nearly does give in many, many times, but she just keeps going, and she set herself, she said she was going to try it for 100 days. And if it was still really pants by then, she was just going to call it a day and go back to drinking. And she got to 100 days, and it wasn't great, but it was worth pursuing, so she keeps going. But as she goes, she talks about the good things that start happening. She talks about the effect on dopamine. She talks about how it dulled her enjoyment of all sorts of other things, and how her senses start coming back. Quite literally, her sense of taste and her enjoyment of food changes. All sorts of things, her irritability levels, so her relationships with her children and her husband start changing. Even one of the things that she was most worried about was socializing and parties. She had this huge fear of suddenly becoming boring if she was the sober one. And she did struggle with that to start with. But actually, as she carried on, she found that she was enjoying those social events more because she could remember them. She could actually remember who the people were that she was having a conversation with and have engaging conversations with them. And then she could turn into a bit of a David Attenborough thing towards the end of the night when everyone else was pissed and she wasn't, in sort of observing the funny behavior of all these drunk people. So she would find all these ways of coping, but then that coping turned into enjoying and seeing the benefits. And of course, the huge benefit, and she could use as a reason for not drinking, was the driving. And just some of the practical benefits that, actually, I can drive home. Don't have to pay for an expensive hotel or an expensive taxi or, all these things. So there's so much. It was such a rich book with practical information, sharing her research, sharing her story. And then, the cancer diagnosis, actually finding that she had a lump. She says that she might not have found it, and she definitely wouldn't have found it as quickly if she'd been drinking. She would have just dismissed it. I can't remember what triggered her. It was her mother calling her to tell her that her aunt had breast cancer, and her mother had also had it. And so she was like, well, 1 female family member, 2, or maybe I should do a breast exam. And so, she went and examined herself and did find something that was off and got a bit dismissed from the when she phoned up the doctor, but she pursued it. So all these kind of things that if she'd have been drinking, she wouldn't have got to an examination as fast as she had. And somebody who'd read her blog put her in touch with like the top breast specialist in the country or something, got her an appointment with him where she was going to have to wait ages through her normal doctor. All these things that kind of fell into place. And then also just the process that she'd gone through with the alcohol, she used the same process with tackling the breast cancer. And having given up alcohol made it so that she went into that battle far healthier. But all the relationships she had with her family and things, everyone just found it easier to deal with. So, it was fascinating. And so it takes you through the whole year. And she finishes with that. She had a party for her birthday, but, she woke up after her birthday sober and all these amazing changes that had happened. So really great book. I'm glad I read it. And I wanted to share it because it was a great follow-on from the things you've been talking about, but also that I think people would benefit from reading it who are thinking about embarking on the same journey, or maybe who have tried it and fallen at some of those initial hurdles and just think it's too hard. It was brutal at times, but it was very hopeful too and very inspiring.
It reminds me a little bit of another book you and I have talked about before, Annie Grace's book, This Naked Mind. And one of the reasons I thought about that as you were talking is the idea of the mindset that, some of us, we might refer to them as excuses or justifications or whatever. But, those things that we tell ourselves that if I don't have this thing in my life, whatever it is, life isn't going to be as good. Life is going to be too hard. I'm not going to be as much fun. Social situations will be too complicated. And it's a way of kind of convincing ourselves making that change isn't possible or is going to just be so miserable that we shouldn't even consider it. So I liked hearing her sharing some of that of like, yeah, we've built up a lot of justifications for whatever the behaviors are, whether it's alcohol or food or other behaviors or other substances. So it reminded me of that book. And as you know, and other people have maybe heard me talk about in various places, That book is what really helped me make a decision about sugar. So I also encourage, one, I find it fascinating what you shared about the physiological health implications of alcohol that I think so many of us have learned to downplay. Again, holding on to that, yes, but they said if I drink red wine, my heart's going to be healthy or whatever. For me, we could write a chapter about that, about sugar, or many chapters. And so I still enjoy learning about people's journey around another behavior or another substance, because I can make the translation to my own journey with sugar.
Yeah, for sure. There were many things that I thought that, yeah, definitely.
So I think for any of us, even if, like for me, alcohol has not been in my life for years, but other things are. And so this is still a really, for me, an important kind of motivational, insight gaining thing. But something else you reminded me of as you were talking is Judson Brewer's work about when we are addicted to something, it has such high reward value for us that nothing else seems to work. So I'm curious, some of us, myself included, might say, oh, I don't know that meditation or mindfulness is really for me. We try it 3 times. We're like, yep, definitely not for me. But part of the reason it might not yet be effective for us because our brain's holding out for that other thing still. It's like, yeah, nice attempt, Terry, but we want the this, whatever that is, the alcohol or the sugar or whatever. This thing, not cutting it. So what does it require? We have to stop using the other thing so that reward value starts to diminish. And we have to keep doing the new behavior until it becomes rewarding. I'm guessing you might have experienced this. I think many of us have experienced this before with physical activity, with exercise, with movement. The first time I tried to run a mile, even after I had done the Couch to 5K, I thought, this is miserable. Why do people do this? It took time until that behavior built, or I connected some reward value to that behavior. And so I just want to put that reminder out there that as we're switching from something, a substance or a behavior, a pattern that holds high reward value, but significant consequences, the other things we try might really fall short at first. And that is totally normal. And it doesn't mean they won't ever be something useful for us.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I was thinking, I thought it sounded like you were going to ask me what she maybe replaced it with. So I was kind of thinking about that. Before I say that, I will just say that in the general, I listen to it, of course, I always listen to books these days. It's a good narrator, but she's a very sort of dry, witty writer. So it's a fun listen as well. And you'll see, I read the fiction first, but you'll see a lot of the anecdotes and things cropping up in her fiction. But she has great observation skills and very witty. So it's a fun read or listen as well. But what struck me actually, what you just reminded me of, and a great takeaway, was one of those things that I could really apply to myself with when you're giving up other substances, was that there wasn't sort of one replacement thing, but the alcohol had been such a big focus and had been her sort of everything. And yes, when you think about giving up something like that, you can quite clearly imagine the huge hole it's going to leave in your life. And that's really hard. And that applies to comfort food, that applies to sugar, that applies to all those things that become all-consuming. But what came out of it with her and her realization as she went along, a lot of the things she does are routine. They do them every year. And one of those things is a holiday in Cornwall. That's down in the southwest of England. It sounds like a beautiful part of Cornwall they go to near the sea, rent a cottage there. So as she was writing this blog, and as she was heading towards doing these things that she'd done the previous year while drinking, she was wondering how they were going to be, how she was maybe going to cope with the stress of packing up and driving the kids. She was the one who tended to have to do the driving. Her husband would follow on later on the train because he couldn't leave work as early, things like that. And she'd always sort of she'd gotten through like that long drive with knowing that she was going to have a nice, a few glasses bottle of wine at the end of it. And so she was, what am I going to do that's going to take the place of that? And what she found was that, yes, some of those things were difficult, and she'd make herself a hot chocolate, or she'd make one of the sort of coping mechanisms that she'd put in place. But she was finding the enjoyment of the smaller things that were bigger things. So waking up without a hangover, waking up earlier and being able to go out and appreciate the beautiful scenery and enjoy the seaside and just enjoy feeling less irritable with the kids, instead of towards the end of the afternoon being on the beach with the kids thinking, starting to think as it was approaching wine o'clock, let's think about packing up and getting back so I can start drinking. They were a bit more chilled and relaxed about it and just going when they felt like it. And so less irritable with the kids, going with the flow more, and, enjoying herself more, enjoying the scenery, enjoying her family, enjoying the sea. One day when it was pouring with rain, and that would have been an excuse to stay at home and watch TV and drink. No, hey, we were going to go out surfing. We're going to get wet anyway. So let's go. Had the beach themselves, had a fabulous time. So she was replacing one thing with multiple other things, but multiple other things that were enriching her life all the time on a daily basis, and so much more rewarding things like relationships and experiencing the joy of nature and what she could see and what she could taste and what she could feel. So one thing was being replaced by many things and filling that hole, but more than filling it, filling it more than it was before, much more.
Yeah, and I think that's so much like a next step or advancement even on what we talked about last week about the dopamine reset, that by resetting it, we can appreciate those smaller but actually more valuable things because we're not being, distracted over here by this big wow thing that we've gotten so connected to. And again, I'm going to go back to sugar for a moment, but I remember when I first read the book, Breaking Up with Sugar, the author of that book kept saying what a big, beautiful life you can have without sugar. And at first when I read it, I thought, man, she is really harping on this thing. But I get why. Because once you remove that big thing that's pulling all of your enjoyment, joy, appreciation, everything, you can enjoy other things in your life differently. And again, while we're tied up in the addiction, we've lost sight of that. Life isn't going to be fun. Parties won't be fun. I won't enjoy vacations with my family. And what people often recognize after making the big switch, I enjoy it more now. I appreciate more things about spending time with my family. I appreciate my downtime differently than I was able to before. It's a really good point, Daisy, about that. It's kind of that bigger picture benefit of doing that dopamine reset or addressing an addictive substance or behavior in our lives.
Yeah, and so you're not left never missing that big thing anymore, but yeah, you can appreciate all the other things that have come back or are new to overfill that place that it took before.
Absolutely.
So there you go. Multiple books to recommend, an author to recommend, but yeah, that one in particular along those lines. But yeah, the fiction was great too. I enjoyed them a lot.
I love it.
If there had been more on offer, I would have had those. I read the whole collection.
Well, now I have more to add to my list. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. Okay, so until I see you next time, I hope you and everyone at home has a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everyone.